So yeah, I'm Liberty, and my talk is called "What They Don't Teach You in the Books." Content design, what they don't teach you in the books, not what they don't tell you in the books. Because I realised after I submitted the talk title that it was a bit grammatically incorrect, so I've reframed it. And also, as I'll get into sort of through the presentation, probably a more accurate title would be "What They Didn't Teach Me in the Books," because I'm coming at this from my own perspective, coming into content design, which I'll talk about through the presentation, and appreciate that my interpretation is probably quite different from everyone else's, but I'm interested to hear sort of where there are commonalities, where potentially you feel a bit different, so we can have a chat about it at the end. So I guess a little bit about me. I'm Liberty. I'm head of content design at TPXimpact. TPXimpact is a consultancy similar to Opencast that also operates doing design and tech in the public sector. And I've been with with TPX as head of content design for about 2.5 years now. We started as a really small team. I think there are about 3 or 4 of us when I joined TPXimpact, and we are now about 19 people. So we've done quite a lot of growth in that time, brought quite a lot of people into the team. And I think like one thing that I wanted to bring through this talk is that these experiences seem to be this sort of like gap between, you know, what content design is in practice and what it ends up being, in theory, and what it ends up being in practice, is something that I see through a lot of the content designers that I've worked with. So just a quick background on like my content design journey. So I started out in 2017. I can see a few of my current and former team members on this call, so this slide will be really familiar to all of them. So I started out in 2017 leading sort of content on a big digital transformation project at the British Heart Foundation. Broadly, my sort of first introduction to content design was defining the information architecture for a really big site and rewriting and like prioritizing the content that needed to be rewritten for that site as part of the digital transformation program that they were doing. I then decided that I wanted to move into the private sector, and I spent about 2.5 years at a fintech called Smart Pension. I moved there because I wanted to like sort of have an idea of what doing content design in a more product design environment was, working in agile and sort of like working with other designers and researchers and developers, which is something that I'd not done much of at the British Heart Foundation, although I did do a bit, as I'll talk about in a minute. And then finally, as I said, I'm currently leading the content design team, about 19 people at TPXimpact, leading that community of practice, making sure it's like a really great way to place to practice content design, and also delivering hands-on content design work for charities, local councils and central government is bulk of our work. But probably the most important thing to know about me, for the purposes of this talk at least, is that I really love books. So here are a few of my bookshelves at home. I did an English literature degree, so I read a lot as part of that degree, and I never stopped reading. I read a lot of books, I buy a lot more books. I'm going to say some of the books in this picture are not my books, some of them are my boyfriend's books. I'm not a big David Jason fan, for example. But yeah, I sort of consider book buying and book reading 2 different hobbies. So although I own all of the books in these pictures, I definitely haven't read all of the books in these pictures. I also come from a long line of authors. So my dad is an author. This is one of his books. My granny, she was an author. This is one of her books. My great aunt, she is now an author. This is her first book. And my great granddad, he was also an author. Yeah, I don't actually own a copy of one of his books, which is why this picture looks different from the other ones, because I had to get my dad to send me one. But yeah, so long family lineage of writing, books, authorship in my family. I've actually even written a book myself, sort of. When I was 8 years old, I helped my grandma write this children's book, which was meant to be a sequel to Cinderella, and she dedicated it to me. So it's not really any surprise that I learned about my career from a book, pretty much. When I first came out of university, which was too long ago to sort of say now. I moved to Leeds, which is where my mum lived at the time, and I worked in marketing for a few years. I didn't really like it very much. I did sort of lots of different types of digital marketing. It felt like something that I could do because I liked writing and I liked words, but I didn't enjoy it very much. And I ultimately decided that I wanted to go traveling and then do a career change, as quite a lot of people do if they are sort of, you know, privileged enough to be able to do that kind of thing. And when I came back from traveling, I moved down to London with my dad, and he introduced me to a friend of his who was a content designer working like sort of contracting in the public sector, told me a little bit about it, made me sort of quite interested. And then he suggested that I read a book called Content Design by Sarah Richards or Sarah Winters, which was just out at the time. So it was sort of end of 2017 that I had this conversation. And once I learned about content design, I wanted to read every book, everything that I could get my hands on to do with content design, because I was so interested. And I just wanted to know everything that I could know in order to get me the best possible chance of securing a job doing it as quickly as possible. And luckily I was able to do that. I came into the British Heart Foundation, as I said, as a contractor, and sort of got in my foot in the content design door that way. And I think that books and articles and podcasts and all of those different resources that we have available to us as content designers now, they're a really great introduction to the world of content design. But when I turned up to my first ever content design job, I felt a bit like this scuba diver in the desert. And I want to give credit to Alice, one of my team members, who came up with this sort of visual, which I really love. I had all of the gear, I had all of the information, but the conditions and the environment were a little bit different to what I was expecting. And now I manage quite a large team of content designers, including some of whom this is their first content design job. And I see a few of them experience the same thing. It's not even exclusive to people who are new into content design. I think sometimes the transition between being in-house and consultancy can sort of like make the job feel like a bit of a different thing than it was before. But also, as we work within a sort of agency environment, we work with clients on projects. Sometimes there can be a bit of a gap between our expectation of the project and the reality of the project. One thing I will say, as I've said here on my slide, books and articles and podcasts and the DDS information on content design, which I read before I became a content designer, they're all really great entry points to content design. And there was a lot about content design that I knew from reading when I turned up at the British Heart Foundation in 2017, and a lot that I learned more quickly than I would have been able to otherwise once I was in the job, because I'd done that background reading. But as I say, sort of my experience is that there's still a bit of a gap between expectation and the expectation and the reality of content design. So why is this? I've sort of identified 3 reasons. One of them is very personal to me. It's because I was coming at it from my very specific perspective. We all come into content design with our own expectations and our own understandings. My experience was coming in as a career switcher in my sort of mid to late 20s. I'd already had mid to late 20s, I was 29, it was definitely my late 20s. I'd had a career in marketing beforehand. I didn't know anything about UCD or product design. I didn't know anything about working in government. I didn't really know what UX was. I don't think I actually knew what the difference between a product and a service was. So to me, like, online content was basically websites, emails, social media posts, that kind of thing, because that's what I'd been working on as a marketer and as a copywriter. And when I read the book Content Design, and I read all of the DDS guidance and everything that I could find about content design before I started at the British Heart Foundation, those were the types of content that I thought about, because those were the types of online content that I was familiar with. The second one is that content design is evolving. Again, I read my first content design book in 2017, and obviously quite a lot of time has passed between then and now. Since then, content design's exploded into the private sector, obviously having started really, being a kind of discipline with a name and a kind of culture and methods and standards. In the public sector, sort of leaked out into the charity sector, and now is exploding everywhere. We're in many more sort of like product design spaces than we were before. Potentially some of them might be using AI or working out how we can use AI in our jobs. we work across different types of projects and in different contexts than we were before, which is a good thing. It means that we get involved earlier, we do more things as content designers than we might have done previously. But I think it's worth remembering when you pick up a book about content design, or any type of design book really, that it's a snapshot of what content design was like to one person, the person who wrote it at that moment in time. And that doesn't mean that they're not useful and it's not great to learn from them, but obviously we should just be ready for content design keep on evolving, and we should all try and evolve with it. And then the final reason that I think there was sort of this gap between the theory that I'd learned in the books and putting it all into practice is basically just because you can't learn everything from books. If you could, I would be an expert in many things that I'm not an expert in right now. Content design, and again, all design really, is really complex, it's really multifaceted, and it's impossible to get all of the nuances of that just by reading books. You have to do a job in order to understand it. So yeah, before I start, and I appreciate that it's a bit rich of me to say before I start when I'm like 12 slides into this presentation, but I'd love to know in the chat, maybe sort of to kickstart our discussion in a little bit, what things surprised you when you got into content design? Was there anything that was different from what you were expecting or what you weren't expecting? And we can sort of have a chat about those when we get to that portion of the session. So yeah, I guess onto what the things that I feel like the books didn't teach me about content design. Oh, sorry, I had an animation on the slide. What's one thing that surprised you when you first became a content designer? Tell me in the chat. So the first one is that content design is a team sport. This is probably like a little bit naive of me, but when I rocked up at my first content design job, I sort of understood the interplay between research and content design, although I sort of assumed that I'd be doing a lot of the research myself and it would be desk research, and that didn't end up being what the case was, which is a good thing. I knew I'd probably be working with subject matter experts to help create content, sort of to be there to give me the information I needed to create really great, well-designed content. In the British Heart Foundation, there was quite a lot of grumpy scientists. But I was sort of a little bit surprised to be met with other types of designers, so like UX and UI designers, and then roles like delivery managers and developers, and all of these different people that I had to work with and negotiate with to deliver content design. And again, I want to sort of stress that I'm talking really about my own experience and my own expectations here. And I think that, as I said, having so little grounding when I came into content design, I'm probably a bit of a sort of special case in here, and a lot of people will know more about UCD and how all the disciplines fit together when they become content designers. But what I've seen is that even those people who have much more of a design background, much more of a design grounding, and who come into the job understanding UCD and all of the design disciplines within it, think that as a content designer, they'll have total control, or like most of the control over the content in the product or the service that they're working in. That's not always the case. There are other people that we work with, subject matter experts, service designers, interaction designers, user researchers, business analysts, client stakeholders, all of those types of people. And that means that creating good content, designing good content has to be a team sport. It has to be something that you own and you are ultimately responsible for, but that everyone collectively sort of has some say in. I think that if we do it in isolation, we're in danger of getting into this mindset that is a mindset that I definitely had when I first started out, of like content can just fix everything. And it is true that content design can make a badly designed product or a badly designed service easier to use, but like if we want to do the really like the most rewarding types of design, the things that I think most of us probably got into design for or like love about design, we need all of our research and design colleagues, and we need the developers and the subject matter experts and the delivery teams around us, and obviously they need us as well. The next point that I want to say is that content design happens all over the place. So again, coming from my own experience, I was thinking very much of like long form content, guidance content on like gov.uk, or like in my case at the British Heart Foundation, content that explained sort of the scientific research that the organisation was doing. I thought that I'd maybe work on some sort of like landing pages and make it really clear where you needed to go to get around the website to navigate through the service, and defining information architecture, thinking about accessibility and like how to make content super easy to understand, and helping users know what they had to do as a result of reading that content. And that actually was sort of what I was doing most of the time at the British Heart Foundation, and it was a really great way to start out on content design. I learned a load by doing this, but I think I learned even more when I moved into a bit more of a product design environment, and I started working like with other designers, thinking about, you know, journey steps, where in a journey the content should come, how information should be displayed like on an app page, microcopy, all of that kind of stuff. That wasn't sort of a part of the world that I even associated with content design when I first started, and I was surprised and like a little bit excited. I thought you had to be a product designer to work in those types of environments. And as I've got further into my career, I've seen like even more places where I think content design can and should make a really big impact that it hasn't got to yet. It's like my energy bill, or like when I get a prescription, the leaflet in the medicine packet, or sort of like, you know, more in the realm of the work that I do at TPXimpact, policy documents, policy content that comes out of government departments that's done in government right around at the moment that would really benefit from content design support. And then even stuff like road signs, or like train, you know, like the sign in the train station sometimes is really confusing. And as a content designer, you think like, oh God, that could be so much better. One of my favourite ever projects that I've worked on was with Camden Council, and it was helping them improve the site notices that get like pinned to lampposts when someone's applied for planning permission. And it was really like exciting and interesting to think about how good content design principles could be embedded in the physical world, not in the sort of digital world. But that's something, again, that when I first started in content design, I didn't ever expect that I would be doing. And I think like once you learn what content design is and where it could be applied, you kind of can't stop seeing where it should be applied. My boyfriend and all my friends and family are always making fun of me for going, oh, that's bad content design, when we like pass a poster or an advert or whatever it is on the tube. The next point is that content design doesn't always mean writing, editing, or designing. I think in the early days of my career, if I wasn't sort of like physically writing content or like iterating designs in Figma, I felt like I wasn't really doing content design. In reality, this is often the smallest part of our job. Showing up to meetings, being a productive member of a product team, learning, thinking, making suggestions, especially in the earlier days of the project, is like a massive part of the content design job. And what's really great is that as our experience grows as content designers, we also are able to provide useful advice and support on like the UCD process as a whole, which is really useful if you're working in low design maturity or just generally low maturity digital maturity environments. The next one is that sometimes just enough content design is enough. And again, when I started out, I was disappointed if I didn't get something I was working on word perfect. I thought I'd be spending a lot of my time like testing and iterating and writing content, and then like, you know, sort of putting it live in the CMS myself. Back to the first point about content design being a team sport, you know, I sort of thought I'd be this one woman band, like sort of doing everything and like, you know, making it perfect, and just that's just not reality. And then again, like once I learned more about the UCD process and sort of like the discovery to live process and the way that you use research to inform your user needs and iterate and test and all that kind of stuff, I had a lot of anxiety around the fact that if we weren't following that process correctly, we weren't doing design or content design in the right way. And this is something that I still see in members of my team, or like, you know, have worked through with members of my team. But actually sometimes, or even most of the time, because of a million factors outside of our control, we have to do just enough content design. And when I'm thinking about what just enough content design is, I think about these points. So I think, is it better than when I started? So if there was no solution, is there now a solution? Or if there was a solution, is the solution better than it was when I started? Yes. Does it meet user needs? Yes, hopefully. And obviously, sometimes some business needs. Is it accessible? Yes, hopefully, if you've done everything that you should be doing. And do the people in charge of it, I appreciate this is probably more relevant to those of us working in consultancy, but do the people in charge of it want you you've finished on the project have what they need to improve it. So have you given them the guidance that they need to sort of like make changes to content in a sort of well-designed way, or like help them understand when content might need to be reviewed or retired or changed? They have access to a style guide, all of that kind of stuff. And if all of those are yes, then I've done just enough content design. It would be lovely to do perfect content design or even great content design, but I know that that's not always possible. And I think, like, just to pull out here, it's really nice to make the service, the part of the service or a product that you're working on, really well content designed, really well designed. But I think that real value as a content designer comes from taking a more sort of end-to-end strategic view that empowers your whole team to deliver good content longer term, and not just you as a content designer in that moment. And then my final point is that there is no perfect content design project. I think especially at TPXimpact, we do a lot of sort of like project shares and like, you know, show and tells and those kind of things. And it can be really like easy to look at the people who are presenting back their projects and going, oh my God, their project sounds so fun. It worked so well. Like it was so perfect. But actually those show and tells, they're like social media. People are giving you their highlights reel. It's never as simple as it seems. And it's really important to remember that. Pragmatism, I think, is the thing that ties all of these points together. And I think that sort of my gap between expectation of content design and reality of content design lay in sort of like a pragmatism gap. I was not pragmatic as a designer when I started, and now I am more and more pragmatic every day. I talk a lot with my team about the importance of pragmatism. I think if I were to write a content design book, I would call it The Pragmatic Content Designer. I think the books that I read when I first became a content designer and the articles that I read were a really fantastic introduction to the practical skills you need to be a content designer. But once I entered the real world, and especially once I became more senior within the content design world, pragmatism alongside those practical skills became really, really important. And obviously being pragmatic doesn't mean being sloppy or lazy or letting things slide, because it just means being realistic about what you can and can't do or influence as a content designer. I think the thing that I love about my job is that the more I do it, the more pragmatic I become, and the more pragmatic I become, the better a designer I become. I guess, like, just to really hammer home the point, I'm by no means saying that the books are wrong. They're always a great entry into content design. They're always a great entry into UCD. But I think, like, what you learn quite quickly when you start actually trying to practice what they teach you is that trying to make good content isn't always enough once you're working with other designers, developers, and like challenging stakeholders in a complex organization. So how do you become a more pragmatic content designer? There are loads of ways. One way is to read more books, or specifically read more widely around design outside of content design. I think I'm going to sort of shout out to another team member now, Jeremy, because almost all of this is verbatim from him based on the conversation that we had when I was sort of workshopping this talk. He said that for him, the next step in learning about the reality of the thing was learning about content strategy, including things like content operations and like governance. And I agree. I think that's really important. And again, there are books that can help you learn about those things. But if you're new to content design, you might not know that there's this whole like other world of things that are really related to content design and really important for content design, but go beyond the core concept of like designing content. And then, like, once you've sort of done all of that and you've learned a bit more about the things around the thing, as it were, you can discover that it's hard to get respect from the other disciplines if you don't learn about their roles as well. So, you know, learning through reading about service design, interaction design, wider UCD and design principles, storytelling and presenting, agile and other delivery thinking, product thinking, digital transformation, all of those things can really stand you in good stead with your colleagues and sort of like help you make a really great case for, you know, your content design agenda. There's this like massive sea of complexity out there, and it's not always clear where this edge of I'm a content designer, I design content comes in that kind of sea of complexity. And I think that through reading more widely and talking to our colleagues and making friends with them and making sure that we sort of like, understand the whole problem. There are loads of really interesting ways that people can develop and make the actual designing of content more possible and more successful, which is what we all want as content designers. So I'm nearly at the end. Just to bring it back to where it all started, for me at least, which was with Sarah's book Content in 2017. She really does hint at this complexity at the end of content design, normalizing the type of work that she describes in that book, which is what we all love to do and what we all sort of probably got into content design to do, and making it more possible is really difficult. You need to be persistent, you need to be flexible, or as I would say, pragmatic, and you need to be bold. And that's why I think that books, and for me particularly this book, are such a great introduction to content design. It's realistic. They're generally realistic about the real world challenges of being a content designer. They give you the practical skills you need, but they're open to saying that the book is just a start, and they sort of acknowledge that there's always more to learn. So as I sort of wrote this talk, I did realise that the title was maybe slightly catfishy. I don't know if you want to give me a bit of feedback on that, because I guess I am talking about what I learned from books, but through what I didn't learn from books, if that makes sense. Anyway, a little bit of a riddle to finish on. That's it from me. I just quickly want to give a bit of credit to my team who really helped me with this talk, really helped me workshop it, specifically Alice and Jeremy, who I've called out already, but everyone on my team was fabulous. And yeah, I'd love to open up a discussion on this. Back to my question earlier about what surprised you when you first got into content design. Any questions or reflections? That's me. Thank you.